Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A gute Woche. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This learning is in schus of our brothers and sisters in Eretz HaKodesh, in Israel, in the Holy Land, especially for those standing on the front lines, being moser nefesh, sacrificing their lives to protect and defend our innocent men, women, and children, our own family, and all of Eretz Yisrael. May Hashem protect them all, especially being Eretz Asher Einei Hashem Elokecha Ba Mereshis Hashana V'ad Achris Shana. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it's also schus and merit Ili Nishmas, memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Shalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Shalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Shalom. And it's also schus and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz Le'erich Yomim B'Shanim Tevis for many long, healthy years. We finished chapter 15 in Tanya, Perek Tezvav, and we're about to enter into Perek Tezayin, chapter 16. I think it's worthwhile to do a little summary so we know where we're at. Tanya is a dense and complex sefer, with its goal being Karev Elecha, completely accessible and personalized to each one of us, but at the same time, the Alter Rebbe is evaluating and analyzing the very soul and the very psyche of each one of us, and for us to be able to help understand ourselves and help us gain self-mastery in fulfilling the mission that we were sent to this world by God. So, 15 chapters. Let's break them down, and especially in the last section that we're talking about the Benoni. Chapter after the introduction, where the Alter Rebbe explained the purpose of Tanya and why he's writing it, and how he's personalizing it. That see the book not as a book, but as a personal yechidus, a personal audience, whereas you're speaking with the Alter Rebbe face to face about everything that lies in your heart and all your challenges. So the first chapter began with Tanya b'seif Perek Gimel, the nida mashbiyanei say that every neshama before it comes down to this world takes an oath, is given an oath to be a tzaddik and not to be a rasha. And the Alter Rebbe asks a number of questions on that, which sets the stage of developing and understanding what means a tzaddik, what means a rasha, and what is a Benoni. So at the end of the second half of chapter 1, he explains there's two nefashos. Every Jew has two souls. The animal soul, which is self-driven, self-interest driven, and then chapter 2 introduces Nefesh Hasheni, the divine soul, Nefesh Elikis, which is divine-driven, transcendent. In chapter 2, he analyzes exactly what is this divine soul. A child of God's. It has, so to speak, a piece of God. Godliness is what defines it, its very personality. In contrast to the animal soul, at the end of chapter 1, which even though God created it as well, but because it's manifests in klipa, in a shell, the godliness is concealed in that shell, and the focus on the shell, which is its own survival, its own needs. Chapter 3, 4, and 5 continue about the divine soul. So 2, 3, 4, and 5 is about the divine soul. Chapter 3 is about the faculties of the divine soul. It has faculties, how it functions. The mind, the emotions, and in the divine soul, both the mind and emotions are all directed toward, as we said, godliness. To fulfill its purpose, not self. In chapters 4 and 5, he talks about the garments, the expression of those faculties, thought, speech, and action. And how through Torah and mitzvahs, the divine soul manifests its faculties. So we have the very nature of the divine soul, its faculties, its garments. Chapters 2, 3, 4, 5. Then come 3 chapters, the Zelu Umazeh, a parallel universe, you can call it a alter ego of the divine, of the animal soul that has also the very nature of the animal soul, he spoke about the end of chapter 1. In chapter 6, 7, and 8, first he speaks about the faculties of the animal soul. Its faculties is focused on self, the klipa. And his garments, then in the next chapter, 6 and 7, continues about, 5, 6, and 7, all three, continues about the garments, the expression of that animal soul. In the klippas itself, he talks about two levels of klippa. Klippas nega, which is more, we'll call the transparent, or you can say the glowing, the klippa, because it's not completely concealing. It's the neutral areas of reshus. And shalosh klippas atmeyas, which is completely forbidden, off limits. The thick klippa that's meant to avoid. If a person, God forbid, falls there, there's the power of tshuva to transform it. Alter Rebbe discusses the different aspects of it and how it manifests in our lives. So now you have the stage set, these two souls existing side by side. Comes chapter 9. So how did I say? Chapter 6, 7, and 8, dedicated to the animal soul. Then comes chapter 9. Now that we know these souls are pitted against each other, like two kings. Ulu Yamatz, the two nations within Rivka, Yaakov and Esav, that are at war with each other. To control what? This Irktan Zeaguf, you and I. The body is considered like a small city, so it's like two empires, two kings fighting for that control. The divine soul, of course, wants the body, meaning the body and all the garments, thought, speech, and action. And all the faculties, which is like the people living in the city, and the garments to follow its direction, its leadership. The king, the other king, the animal soul wants it to follow its leadership. And that's the battle. In more detail, he discusses the different aspects of the battle and how you ultimately conquer. There are many stages. You can conquer, but there's still, the enemy is very active. You could conquer, the enemy is less active. Till completely vanquished, till the point you could even transform the enemy to become an ally, an asset. Once we have now this setup, now comes back to chapter 10, Alter Rebbe talks about the tzaddik. The tzaddik is the first identifiable, they call it personality, archetype. And who is the tzaddik? Someone who's nefesh alikis, indeed, has won and vanquished the animal soul to the point that it transformed it. And in tzaddik itself, there are two levels: tzaddik gomet, tzaddik she'enu gomet, tzaddik v'toivle, tzaddik v'rale. Chapter 11, the other extreme, the other end of the spectrum, the Rasha. There the battle rages. Sometimes the animal soul wins, sometimes the divine soul wins. Meaning controlling the thought, speech, and action of the person's behavior and speech and thoughts. And in Rasha itself, there's also two levels. Rasha v'tevle, Rasha v'rale. Rasha. What is the difference? And Rasha v'rale, the animal soul is so dominant that you don't see much of the divine soul. You don't see the charata, the regrets. That doesn't mean the divine soul is not there, but it's in a form of makif. Okay. Now comes down to, so what about us? Each one of us. A tzaddik, as we'll learn a little later, is not really accessible to most people. You have to have the neshama of a tzaddik. A Rasha, obviously, is not the objective. Alti Rasha. So what then is expected of us? The Benoni. The Benoni is someone whose faculties of the divine soul and animal soul are both active. There's a battle going on. However, he has self-mastery. He controls himself. Doesn't allow the animal soul to actively affect and control his thought, speech, and action. So basically, in his thought, speech, and action, he looks like a tzaddik. But in his faculties, he looks like a Rasha, because there is a battle raging. But he's neither of the two. He's a Benoni. And then the Alter Rebbe introduces, there's also different times. There's times, for example, when he's davening, so he has now additional strength. It's a special time where the animal soul can be even more subdued. But then there's after davening and the battle rages. So what exactly defines his ability to control himself? Why? What tool does he have? Which is critical, because it's not just automatic. So it's moyech shalat ala lev. In chapter 9, he explained that the divine soul resides in the moyach, and in the right side of the heart. The animal soul resides in the left side of the heart. So the reflective mind has a natural dominance over the impulsive heart. That Moich Shal Talev gives him that additional power. Of course, God created us with that Moich Shal Talev. And it's like Yisin, Ermin Acheshech, Isi, there's a Yisin, Chacham Min HaSichlus. Chacham has a natural dominance, says Shlomo HaMelech, over folly, over the insanity of the animal soul. Just like there's the natural dominance of light over darkness. So what he has to do is activate that self-control. That's the work he needs to do. And that requires using his mind. This applies both in Bein Adam L'Chavere, Bein Adam L'Mokim, meaning the mitzvahs between us and Hashem, and Bein Adam L'Chavere as he concludes the second half of chapter 12. Any feelings of anger, well, he doesn't mention anger actually, hate, jealousy, grudges, and so on. Now, since we talked that there's one chapter dedicated to Tzaddik, chapter 10, chapter 11 is dedicated to the Rasha, chapter 12 is beginning of the Benoni, but now we'll go several chapters all about the Benoni. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 you can also say. So 12, I just said, defines what the Benoni is. In chapter 13, he continues to discuss what exactly drives this, what's the forces behind it. So he speaks, there are two judges, they don't control him. They state their opinion, the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, Nefesh HaBamis, Nefesh HaLekis. And God will always take the side of the Nefesh HaLekis. This God can be explained both the power that he gives Moich Shal Talev, but also once you choose to activate your self-control, God gives you even more power, Kodesh Baruch HaEzrei, to dominate and control. And with this, the Alter Rebbe then continues to explain what exactly it means that the idea that a person is should always see themselves like a Rasha. The story with Rabba. Let's just look inside to make sure that this is all in chapter 13. Yeah. That because, remember, a Benoni is not a low level. A Benoni means a person is completely dedicated to Yiddishkeit and to Torah mitzvahs. However, he still has a Nefesh HaBamis. So that's why it's not Nizbat L'Gamri B'Benoni, as opposed to a Tzaddik. So therefore, even though he learned Torah all the time. Because in his humility, he said to himself, he could be learning Torah and all that, but nevertheless, who knows? Maybe he still has that. But he was a tzaddik. But in his mind. Okay, which answers that question from the beginning of Tanya. The second half of chapter 13, he talks about how true is this control and this love that the Benoni has, especially during davening. Because if it goes away afterwards, we said only by a tzaddik you really have emes lamite. She explains that this emes is relative and true for the Benoni on his level. That's also true, which is a critical point to understand the value of the Benoni. That it's not just an illusion. It's not something which should be dismissed. Okay. In chapter 14, the Alter Rebbe then says now he talks practical. How does it practically apply in real Avodah? That this is the midas kol adam v'achara kol adam yimshach midas habenoni. This is actually the very personality of each one of us and something we are drawn to and should be drawn to. Which means what's expected of us is self-control. We're not expected to control your heart, the impulses of the animal soul. That's not in our power. But self-control is absolutely in our power. So in this chapter, he talks actually the process of what you do and how do you activate that self-control and how do you, and then bring it down into action of controlling your animal soul. I should have added one more thing. Let me just go back. In the resources so far that we've talked about the Benoni, this is important for the whole. So in chapter 12, he spoke about the Benoni has Moich Shal Talev. He also spoke about during davening, the time that in the day gives an additional strength. And he also spoke about the Ava Mesuteres, though briefly it'll later become more prominent in Tanya, that we all also have a natural, innate love for God, which is concealed, but it's there, and also has its impact. Obviously, you need the Moyach Shal Ta'alev because the Ava Mesuteres is concealed. In chapter 13, he added the Eibishter stands on the side of the Nefesh Elikis, so there's yet another force here at work. So the Benoni has plenty of resources to access. I'm saying it because now in chapter 14 that where he talks about midas, that the power we have, all of this comes into play. All these different elements help the Benoni achieve the intended goal. And the Alter Rebbe speaks in a very personal language of what he should be contemplating. Actually, like what should you say to yourself to control yourself over the animal soul. But this is all in actuality, meaning emotions, you can't control the emotions of the animal soul. And the ability to completely despise anything from this material world. That is, Dafka Tzaddik has that. Tzaddik is born with that power. And he says it's not in the kol odam zeichel, and not everyone merits it. It's more like in kibbutz chad, it's like a reward. And that's why it says, Barasat tzaddikim, some people are tzaddikim, and some people are not. And with that he explains in chapter 14, the second half, we'll understand the shvur, the two terms. Tehit tzaddik v'al tehit rasha. What do you need to say? It seems redundant. So he says, no, al tehit rasha means be a Benoni. Tehit tzaddik is something not everybody can be a tzaddik. In kol odam zeichel is tzaddik. You don't have the choice over that. So then the question, of course, is, why do we then have this first part of the shvur? Should just say, Mashbir, I say, Al tehit rasha, be a Benoni. So he says, a person still has to make the attempt. This comes that we still have to do everything possible to be like a tzaddik. Meaning to do everything possible to actually despise negative things and to love God with all our passion, even if we don't reach it. And then he says, even if you can't reach there, you still do your part. That's what Aveda means, to do your part. That's what the Benoni is doing. To fulfill the shvur, shemazbin. He took an oath. So the oath means do your best to be a tzaddik. And Hashem yasat teiv be'einav. What God's in control, God will do. V'oid continues further. Shehergel al kol davar shiltim v'nasa tevasheni. But when you keep trying, it becomes part of your habits, your routines, then it becomes tevasheni. And then he says, Asus l'tata asus le'elu, what can happen? Kule v'chule haiva ulai, yara lo ruach memorim, that can come from Hashem, can actually give you the b'chinas ibur, m'sherish eze tzaddik shel saber boy. B'chinas ibur, in like what's called in Kabbalah, a state of like pregnant state. It means basically the transferring of a neshama, of the power of a tzaddik within you. But that's coming from above through your avoid. So he adds now a whole other elements that the Benoni has further resources. So do our part with the Moyach Shal Ta'alev, with everything else that we have, and then, and the Hergel, and try your best, and Ulay Kula Haiva Ulay. And then he will be fulfilling actually Tehit Tzaddik, the Mashbir Nesei Tehit Tzaddik. Okay. Then chapter 15, the last chapter we learned, continues in defining and it's describing what the Benoni is. And here we learn about two levels of a Benoni. There's a tzaddik and a rasha that we learned about. And that's in the pasuk that he brings right in the beginning of chapter 15. V'shaftem, which says, V'di'isam ben tzaddik l'rasha, okay, tzaddik and rasha, ben eved elikim l'asher lo avodeh. What is the second half? So he says, eved elikim l'asher lo avodeh is the Benoni. And the Benoni has two levels. The eved elikim l'asher heva, he's actively working, constantly battling. Lo Avodah means not that he's not a Benoni, not that he doesn't have control, but it doesn't come with Avodah. It doesn't come with effort, either because it's his nature. His nature is that he's more focused on learning. That's what he gravitates to. His nature is not cold-blooded, he's not that passionate and fiery about the animal instincts of a person and so on. Or Teva Sheni, which is interesting, similar to what he said in the middle of chapter 14, Teva Sheni, that a person works hard. There he's talking Hergel to become like a tzaddik, to try to become like a tzaddik. But the Teva Sheni, here comes, he done it so, he's become so used to it, it's become like mechanical for him. It's not a Veda. And here it's enough is to have the Ava Mesuteres that he spoke about at the end of chapter 12. Or the middle of chapter 12. So there, you can't say that he doesn't get credit for it, but it's not really Aveda. It's mostly based on his very nature, or second nature. What is Eved Elikim? There he works on himself. And there too he spoke about two ways. There he spoke about that works on himself, firstly, that he simply does that the real work, that he goes beyond his regilus. It's not Teva Sheni, that if he's learning 100 times, the 101 time, that goes beyond the routine, then he's called Eved Elikim, as the Gemara says. Because he worked hard, but through contemplation. Because how did he get out of his routine? He had to go back to Mishbeinim B'Gedulas Hashem B'Meichel, Lishlet Al Ateva, on his nature, even his good nature. And that's the Aveda Tam L'Beinoni, the complete Aveda. A lower level of Eved Elikim is L'Eres Ha'ava Mesuteres Shebelibe. It's not that he created a love through contemplation, but the hidden love in his heart, he fanned those flames. Limshal Yodes Ateva Shebechol Asmuli. That's also called Shezezu Nikra Gamkein Aveda, because it is some Aveda. So there's two levels in the Eved Elikim itself. Mashenkin, Kishein Lemachom Klal Ein Avezu Mesaras V'Nikras Avedase Klal. It's not called his Aveda. Again, he's a Benoni, but it's coming much, much easier. So what do you see here? That the Alter Rebbe laid out so many aspects. First of all, the Benoni's resources. The Meich Shalta Lev, the Ava Mesuteres, the power that God gives him, the power that he puts in the Chochmah within him is God's power, including the power of Meich Shalta Lev, and then the power that comes after you do Aved, the Eibishter will help you and support you. The power that when you work harder, there's the Asus Latata, Asus Le'ela, the effort that you make, and maybe that can even bring the Neshama of a tzaddik. And now also, it covers also the different types of people. And also the time of the day, for example, during davening. Any Esros, Shabbos, Yom Tov, all gives more resources, more strength to the Melech, to the king of the divine soul, and the Benoni to win the war, or to control the Irktana, to be more specific, to control and subdue the animal soul. So you have many variations here with almost every given scenario, including now also the scenario about a person who's naturally this way or second nature, and then the Aveda that's necessary. So with this, sets this tone and set the stage for the next chapter, which we're going to begin learning now. Chapter 16. What does he come in chapter 16? So first of all, he comes and says, now that we've learned all of this, let's sum up what's really the power of a Benoni. And he's going to give us two klalim. The Benoni's goal, the first klal, is the Benoni should control his heart, meaning the heart of the animal soul, where the animal soul resides, as much as he can. And the second klal is what happens if he can't completely awaken divine love and divine reverence, Ava V'Yira. So Alter Rebbe is going to now qualify and explain a few more aspects that will help round out the whole picture of the Benoni. But it flows from chapter 15. Now that we said that there's different levels of a Benoni, so Alter Rebbe now says that what really defines a Benoni, that's how he begins the chapter, is this, ultimately the control of the heart. Now, true, the person who has that natural, because he's born that way, like he said, mitzunan beteva, he's cold, and more so-called, more detached from the passions of the animal soul. Or he's what he said before, he's in a state of, he's a more serious person, like what he called it, moresh cheda, and that also lends itself toward learning. Or he trained himself that way. He did it beside the Gillis. Could be training, it could be community, it could be his upbringing. That's also a Benoni. The Benoni, however, is defined by the avodah that he does, because that's still called lo yavodai. So all this is now going to be addressed in chapter 16. So let's learn inside and see how it flows. So he says that V'zel klal godel ba'avedus Hashem lebeinanim. So the chapter begins. For beinanim, v'zel klal godel. This is the all-encompassing principle. Klal godel, not just klal godel. So the Alter Rebbe is designating it. Earlier he designated midas kol adam, midas habein is midas kol adam v'acharei kol adam yimshach. Now he's saying klal godel ba'avedus Hashem lebeinanim. The all-encompassing principle for Beinanim is ha'ikirhu, in the service of God, rather, the worship and service of God. What is the klal godel? Ha'ikirhu. The primary thing is limshel ulishlet ala teva shebachol lasmali. To master and control, or to dominate and control, ala teva shebachol lasmali, and the natural tendencies in the left side of the heart, the left chamber of the heart, where the animal soul resides. In other words, it's not just that a person should control his thought, speech, and action, meaning that everything should be proper. But it should also affect the personality, that he's working on himself to control his impulses. And that his impulses, his emotions should be directed toward godly aims and not animal soul's aims. So it's not that every time he is, he has a taiva, a desire from his animal soul, he controls himself. He's changing himself. He's transforming himself. Remember in chapter 15, he talked about Eved Elikim. Not just a person who's naturally that way. So in a way, you could also say that Klal Gadol is coming to sum up that point, that it needs avodah. But clearly, since it's a new chapter in Klal Gadol, he's talking about it in general. So you could say, what about the person who's called Lo Yavodeh? He's also a Benoni. So where's the Klal Gadol by him? So the truth is that a person like that also has a nefesh habamis. He's called Lo Yavodeh because he has that natural inclination, doesn't take that much work. But to say that he never has a taiva, you can't say that. Alter Rebbe didn't say he has an animal soul. It just doesn't require that much work. And it's enough the Ava Mesoteres. And later he said there's Aveda also of fanning the Ava Mesoteres. But even Ava Mesoteres, that's not done through Aveda. Just the natural Ava Mesoteres, he cannot say there's no Aveda at all. Alter Rebbe doesn't say explicitly what I'm saying now, but you have to say that's ultimately pshat. But the ikirhu is limshal lishmal tevesh b'chol. You want to change yourself. This is, in other words, the neshama came down below, not just damage control, not just to control actions, thoughts, and speech and thoughts. It's to become a more divine person. And that's the klal that he's saying here. And then he's going to continue to tell us how that happens. But we'll stop here. All right, the beginning of chapter 16. Everyone have a good tavach, Klal Yisrael, and every yachid, every man, woman, and child, and that's Yisrael everywhere should be safe and protected, and we should be zecher ready to the Gula Mitzvah Vashlema and complete Shalom, and that's Yisrael and everywhere in the world.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.